Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
John Morgan, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Paul. This is quite an honor.
Yeah, apparently you and I know a lot of the same people.
That's what I've heard. Yeah, I've heard that.
And you and I connected, sort of simultaneously between Chris Peace and Courtney Farrell, right?
Two dear friends. I respect both of them. Yes, it was in the course of maybe, I think 10 minutes, they both texted me and said, do you know this guy, Paul? No, I don't know. Who is Paul? Who is this guy?
Well, they're both great people, and it's great to meet you a couple weeks ago telephonically, and good to see you this morning.
Absolutely. And you know what? It looks like spring is cracking through. I'm so ready. I'm looking out my window right now into the woods. And, I joke with Chris sometimes. We always talk about how fast time moves, and we'll jump 2 seasons. And I feel like we'll joke around and say, like summer's over, even if it might be winter, just because it seems like time moves so quickly. And I have to remind myself to, enjoy the moment. But I'm glad spring is here. Let's get the show on the road, warm weather. I'm so ready.
Yeah, this may be the best time of the year. It's not super hot. You've got warm weather coming for the next several months. Skies are blue a lot more often this time of year than they are in the winter. Yeah. And the seasonal, what is it? The seasonal affect disorder? SAD?
Right.
Yeah. SAD's over for at least.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, John, you grew up in the city, right?
I did. Yes. I grew up in Richmond on West Franklin Street between Spokane and Willow Drive, in a very small home, one bathroom for most of my childhood. And then we, did a little addition and put another bathroom in. So it was a very modest upbringing. My dad worked for Virginia Power, and my mom was a school teacher. And I would say childhood was great. We didn't have a lot of kids to play with in the neighborhood. So my sister and I were kind of left to our own devices. We watched a lot of cable TV. We were left at home for summers. So we kind of created our own fun, which sometimes got us into trouble. But yes, I grew up in Richmond City proper, 23226.
Did you leave the house a lot as a younger kid, like when you were 8, 9 years old, or did you not?
Absolutely. We were, it was totally the Goonies generation. My sister and I were always exploring on our bicycles, and would always push the envelope. Could we go further and further? And, I can remember riding from West Franklin Street all the way up to Lafayette Pharmacy to buy like a big pack of Jolly Ranchers. And it probably took me, 10 minutes to get there, but I think it was 8 blocks. And that felt like a rite of passage. Okay, wow, we made it to a place we can buy candy. Where else can we go?
How far did you go before you turned 12, do you think? Did you go out like a mile? Or I guess since we're in the city, we should say blocks.
Certainly. Oh, for sure. I think we ended up riding. There were a couple of business complexes near Willow Lawn. We would go to Willow Lawn. That was a little bit, treacherous back then. I think one of the few kids in the neighborhood got his Ridline BMX bike stolen. I think the guy actually pulled a knife on him and made him switch bikes with him. So we would ride to the JCC, and I think we probably went more than 3 miles out. I got in trouble once because my mom had a whistle she would blow. I guess, I don't know, there's some story to this whistle, but she would blow the whistle, and the whistle meant it was time to come home. And I remember one time, I guess she'd been blowing the whistle and I didn't hear it because I was out of range. And I got into some trouble after that because they called the few kids in the neighborhood, and I wasn't there. And, of course I didn't think it was any big deal.
Yeah, I don't think a whistle travels 3 miles, at least not in the city, right?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. My mom is a little, she's been known to, she can make that whistle sing, but yeah, she was not very happy with me.
I'm intrigued. I think the story of the red BMX bike is the first time I've ever heard of a threat of a knife and a trade of bikes, not the outright stealing of a bike.
Yeah, he came home. He came home with like the quintessential 1970s rider, the banana seat, kind of some monkey bars. I think they're called gorilla bars, maybe the front tire was out a little bit too long. It was like a chopper bike. And I had my BMX bike was called a Schwinn Thrasher. It was bought at AG's, and it was kind of, it was trying to look the part, but it wasn't really legit. So over, 4 or 5 years, I would replace the tires, replace the handlebars, replace the seat, put checkerboard pads on it, new pedals with spikes and I tricked it out so it looked legit. But I remember hearing that his Ridline bicycle was stolen, and I knew that was a big deal because, I know Rad, I think, is being re-released, the BMX movie, and I was a closet BMXer, man. I wanted to, somehow be on a race course somewhere. So when that bike got stolen, and he told me that story, and he had that like Huffy, I was like, whoa, that's a sad story, sad day in BMX lore.
Yeah. Well, so BMX, did you ever get on a track?
I never did. I would check out books at the library and, put on these like green boots that I think most kids had when we were kids that, went up to your knees and had like 35 eyelets, and put a football helmet on and try to pretend like I was the part. But I just was jumping off curbs and trying to pretend like I knew what I was doing. But no, I don't even know if there were tracks around here. There was one guy I knew, Carter Bundy. He's a master brewer here in town, won some awards. He went to St. Chris and UVA, big soccer guy, but he raced a little bit as a kid. And I was always so envious when he would talk about it. I don't know where he did it.
Yeah. What year did he graduate?
He's with me, 94. He's got some buddies, two brothers you would know, Walter and Peyton, I think.
Yeah, Walter was at St. Christopher's the same time I was.
Yeah,
I think he was a year ahead of me. Yeah, it's small world, man. Super small world.
Shagbark, I think, is his thing.
Yeah, last time I was in there, he was there, and he's such a good dude, such a good guy. And the Shagbark's an amazing restaurant.
I haven't been there in a while, but yeah, anyway, the BMX thing I just thought was so cool. And again, being left to our own devices, you would watch the movie and then you would try to like, okay, how can we be the outsiders? How can we be BMXers? I remember there was some movie my sister and I watched about the Canadian. It's like a true story, who was going to be the like marathon runner around the world. And he had cancer and only had one leg. I don't know if you remember the movie. And
I do.
My sister and I would then pretend to be that guy. Like one of us would limp and one of us would be the bike, the kind of like the support vehicle on our bike next to him. We'd run around the neighborhood. Yeah.
Wait, so are you older than your sister?
No, she's older than me. She's 4 years older, but her name is Susan. She looks like she's probably 15 years younger than me, though. She's got all the young DNA.
And she would tolerate your presence that much. Because 4
years.
Yeah,
I think so. It was a matter of there wasn't a whole lot else to do or people to hang out with. So we were pretty close as kids.
All right. So let's say you were 7, she was 11, one bathroom. What did the morning routine look like on a school day?
Oh gosh. You know what? I just remember right before she got her license, the car she drove was a 1972 Toyota Corona, like the beer station wagon. My friends called it the booger. You could see the street underneath it. AM radio, no AC, a lot of duct tape. Before she got her license, and she when she did get her license, she would let me drive all over the neighborhood, which was awesome. You could take the key out of the ignition and the car would still drive. It was perfect. A great car to learn on. But before she got her license, she was kind of like my youngest son. It was just impossible to get her out of the bed. So I think I remember sitting in the car, the routine of my mom telling me, like, go start the car. That was a big routine, go start the car, warm it up. And I would be sitting in there, and eventually my mom would come to the car, and then my sister would be last. And I feel like it was always, a little bit of a battle in the morning getting us out the door. But I don't remember the bathroom part of it. I feel like it was, I don't know. I don't remember too much of the either drama or trauma of that.
I'm guessing your parents had a good routine. You had a window where you could do what you needed to do in the bathroom, and then your sister was the last one.
Yeah, my dad's always been an early riser, so he was usually gone in the morning already. And then when I really squint my eyes and I look backwards and I can see the morning routine, that was when we had that second bathroom, and it was a little bit easier. But yeah, for some reason, you hear these situations, people have like 8 kids in one bathroom. It seemed like it all worked out. I never felt the stress of a small home. I think a couple of times after, hanging out with buddies and recognizing the economic difference between my family and other people, then it was a little bit more apparent. I remember getting dropped off once after spending a week in Pawleys Island with a buddy, and his brother's friend had come along with a trip too, and they were dropping me off. And I remember the kid said, something like, "That's your house? Super small." And I remember saying, "Yeah, well, it goes out in the back."
Well, so, John, I can relate. I grew up with one bathroom, a sister, younger in my case. And I brought, I think the first St. Christopher's kid over. I was in 8th grade, and I had been to his house, and it was quite the house. And when we pulled up next to our house, he goes, what a lovely, quaint house. I'm like, I think you just insulted me, but I'm not sure how to take that.
Right.
But you were Keith. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, I think that, at some point, I think as a child, you start to recognize that economic presence, some sooner than later, and I think, I certainly see it with my own kids too, just whether it's trying to teach them about money or opportunities that present themselves, teaching them what is reasonable and not reasonable, even when it comes to birthday or Christmas, trying to, teach them the power of, the dollar and all those things.
Yeah. Money's part of how society functions. Right. But moderation also needs to be taught, and greed is a deadly sin, that sort of thing. And I don't want to get into philosophy of how to raise children, but yeah, you and I learned quite a bit about coming from a fairly humble place and going to school with kids who never had to worry about where the next meal was coming from. And we didn't either. You and I didn't grow up that way, but we certainly grew up a little more humbly than a lot of the kids we went to school with. But you were a K-12 guy. And so I guess it wasn't a culture shock for you, because 5-year-olds don't really care about how big someone's house is or how many bathrooms they have, right? You integrated right away, I imagine.
Yeah, I feel like for me, my father went to St. Christopher's. He was a boarder. He was class in 1965. He had 2 brothers, and neither one of them went to St. Christopher's. The way I've heard the story, his story is pretty powerful. My dad, I think, was, kind of up to no good in North Carolina. And his dad was like, you need to straighten out. We're going to send you to boarding school. So I think he repeated freshman year. And he'll tell you that St. Christopher's was one of the, if not the best, one of the best things that his parents did for him, just sending him to a place where he quickly, I think, figured out who he was and pushed him and allowed him to kind of become closer to the man he, would become in life. And I think the worth of that experience was strong enough that for when my mom and dad decided where they were going to send my sister and me, it was as much as a sacrifice for them, I think, as anything. And though they would remind us about that every once in a while, like if we were acting up, they would certainly kind of remind us of the experience we were having and the value of it. I think it's one of those things. I don't know. My sister and I think about it on a regular basis, this valuable gift they gave us, but it wasn't easy. And we were on financial aid, both of us, for 13 years. But I certainly see the value of the experience. And certainly now that I've taught at the Saint schools for combined, 22 years at both of them, I see the worth in the program. But also see the sacrifice that some families make, and some make a lot, and some make, a different kind of sacrifice. Maybe it's not economically, but it could come in a different way. So, yeah. I certainly value what it gave me, and that's probably even more true than, or actually, I would say that the VMI part of that, not to get into the college program, but I think that that's even more true there for me.
Yeah, we'll definitely explore your experience at VMI. St. Chris, 70, 80 kids graduate from there every year. You and I are two of a pretty small group of people that were fortunate enough to have that experience. And when you say pushed, like, I don't know what it was like when you graduated in 94 and what the high school experience was for you, but I will tell you, my time there, I'm trying not to embellish this. I had 2.5 to 3.5 hours of homework every night, Sunday through Thursday night. There may have been some exceptions to that time range, but we were pushed very, very hard. And I remember I had a lot of public school friends because I grew up going to public schools through 7th grade, and my friends didn't have homework. And I'm like, my parents are being so tough on me to send me to this school. And at some point while I was there, I realized, wow, this is an amazing experience. I had matured enough to realize how fortunate I was to go there. And then by the time I was in my mid-20s, I'm like, wow, how lucky was I to have parents that had the foresight and the willingness to send me to a place like that. Absolutely amazing opportunity.
Yeah, I agree, especially on the homework part. I just remember when I got home from school and sports, I was in my room. I wasn't always very productive, but I was in my room. The rule was you didn't watch TV during the week. The TV was off. And I can remember a couple of times, my parents would run an errand or something, and I would try to sneak, a little bit of some show. But after the nightly news, if my dad watched that after dinner, the TV was off. I can remember he would watch MASH sometimes, but the expectation was in your room studying. That was it. And you would, if you finished your homework, then you were working on something else. I think, this is probably, hopefully, the value I can bring to the table as a teacher. School is never easy for me. Like any student, I think I had bumps and bruises, teachers that I loved, teachers that got a lot out of me, expected a lot. And I also had ones I just felt like it was just challenging. It was super challenging. And I was probably at best a C+, B- student. And then I'd have moments where I really connected and felt like this is my thing. But even though I teach English now, I wasn't some, master chef English student back in the day. If anything, if you told those English professors back then that I was going to someday teach English, they would have laughed. And so I think I remember that student, meaning myself, being up there in the bedroom with their nose in the book, struggling, trying to figure it out. And certainly when I teach now, I remember that kid who it wasn't easy, and it was more of a plugger situation where you're just working really hard, and you might work really hard and still get, a horrible grade. In my classroom, I have an F, not an F. I have a D-, which is worse than an F. I have a D- on my board that was graded by Jay Wood, who's now my son's academic advisor. I have a C-, a B-, and an A-. And the A- is a rewrite, so it doesn't even really count,
Well, I mean, your experience, your path probably very powerfully reinforces this notion that every kid has value and every kid deserves equal consideration.
Yeah,
Or
absolutely. And I told my son this yesterday. He had my 7th grader had his first baseball game, and he was down on himself, saying he wasn't any good at baseball. And I always love the phrase, it's not where you start, it's where you finish, and just try to reinforce that notion. And I've been in interviews before where somebody's coming to St. Catherine's and wants to, be considered for an English position. And I've been in the room before where someone said, well, what kind of student were they in high school? And I always kibosh that. And I say, oh my gosh, if I were judged on who I was in high school, that would be just such an unfair testament to hopefully what I can bring to the table now. I mean, I wouldn't have a job. I would be doing something completely different. It's so the amount of growth, especially I think a young man can do in months, years, you stack that on top of, each other. And I'm glad that I'm not the guy I was in high school anymore, but I'm glad I was that guy then,
Yeah. I've remind myself a lot because I have a son, he's 23. The male brain is not fully mature until around 25. And so how dare you ask a question about what the kid was like 14 to 18?
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. It's not something that I would ever base any decision on. So yes, you should kibosh that every single time it comes up. So I want to go back to something you said about your dad growing up in North Carolina and went to St. Christopher's. So that's back when it was a boarding school.
That's right. Yes, he's told me some pretty, funny stories about being a boarder. But yeah, he was a boarder for 4 years, and played football, varsity football. I think they had a pretty good record. He played varsity basketball, varsity track. And he still talks about these teachers and coaches he had. He was talking about one of them yesterday. I know he's got a story where his dad came all the way up from North Carolina to watch him play basketball. And I guess he'd gotten into it, my father, with the coach, and he got benched and didn't play. But I think, again, he was pushed to learn how to, study, learn how to read. And he ended up going to Guilford College. And as a young boy, he took flight lessons in North Carolina. His story was that he really wanted to be a pilot. And I think when he was at Guilford, he went to the naval office with hopes of becoming a pilot. And he passed the test. They put him on an airplane and said, we're going to send you up to, I think, Virginia to take some more tests. And so he was biding his time, waiting to find out if he'd made it to naval flight school. And my grandfather worked at Burlington in the textile industry. And I guess somehow it got my dad a job to bide some time. And he was working in a mill. I don't know the full story. I should really have him, sit down and tell me the ins and outs of it. But he was tasked with breaking down some maybe boards or something. And he was either driving a nail or removing a nail, and the nail flew up and hit him in the eye. And he ended up at Duke Hospital. They removed his eye. And the crazy thing about that story is when he was at Duke Hospital, he got a sack of mail. And one of the letters, I've got a copy of it, says, thank you for your interest in the Naval Flight Program. You've been accepted. Oh. And of course, he didn't go. And then I have the letter where it says, we've heard about your injury. And, if something changes, they were trying to be nice. Of course, nothing was going to change. But if that accident hadn't happened, he wouldn't have met my mom. I wouldn't be talking to you. So he didn't go to Vietnam, but that was kind of his trajectory, wanting to be a pilot, but it didn't happen. I think there's, like anything in life, a lightning strike like that, you hurt a little bit forever. But I certainly feel like it all made him, again, a better person and, who he is today.
How old's your dad now?
He's almost 80, 79.
What part of the world does he live in?
My parents are still here. They live in a home that they bought after the home we were talking about. They're over on South Side, Westover Hills, and they've been in that house since I think 94. He's a big old time music guy, plays the farmer's market, and my mom tutors out of the basement, and saw him yesterday, and they're doing well.
Well, so I don't normally make this offer on while we're recording, but I would love to talk to your dad.
Okay.
And have you co-host with me.
Oh, wow. That would be fantastic. I'll definitely ask him about that. That'd be great.
So, John, I had my dad on. My dad is 79 as well. And I had my son. He was, I think, 18 at the time. And we interviewed. By we, I mean, I think my son asked one question. But we interviewed my dad, and I learned a bunch of things that I did not know. And I asked him at the end of the recording when we finished, I said, Dad, how come you didn't tell me all these things that I just learned? He goes, you never asked. I'm like, okay. So I would love to interview your dad with you by my side, or at least
that'd be great. Let's see if we can make that happen. I'll ask him.
I love that. All right. St. Christopher's, when you were in high school there, so you weren't known as a force academically, athletically, did you have a sport or an endeavor that you really gravitated to?
So my sister has asthma. So when we were kids, the whole thing was swimming. This was before the schools had a swim team. So I mentioned JCC earlier. We would go to JCC. We would swim all year round. And my sister was a good swimmer. So then my parents decided, maybe this is something to consider. So then we switched over. We swam for VAX, Virginia Association Competitive Swimming, which ended up becoming NOVA. And we swam for VAX for a number of years. My sister ended up swimming at Sweetbriar, and I did contract swimming at St. Christopher's. So swimming was the thing, I think, because I got plugged in super early, I was good at. But what took me away from swimming was lacrosse. I was obsessed with lacrosse. My dad bought me my first lacrosse stick, a Super Light 2 from St. Christopher's bookstore in third grade. It was red, and I just love lacrosse. It was all about lacrosse for me until a couple major things happened. When I was in seventh grade, it's kind of got two stories here, but in seventh grade, a new boy came to St. Christopher's named Jamie Van Dorsen. I don't know if you've heard that name before, but he had a heart condition. He couldn't play a sport. And so he fell in love with music and drums. And then I could spend a whole podcast on him and telling his story, but one day he was in Windsor Farms where he lived, and some girls asked him if he wanted to walk to Carytown. And it was on that walk to Carytown, I think to go to Plan 9 Records, that he had a major heart episode and he died on the sidewalk of Carytown. So this was you kind of, I think as a boy, you're always looking for a best friend. I certainly had a number of friends, but I felt like I had more of a circle of friends, but Jamie was the guy that I felt like he was my best friend. So that was a lightning strike for me. And I felt like when he died, it was actually, I emailed his parents this past week. So it was March 18th when it happened. I think it was 31 years ago. I felt like in some ways, I don't know if I completely understood it at that moment. I felt like the torch of drumming and music was handed to me, and music really became a huge part of my life. I got my first drum set right before he passed away. And, he had a drum set. I'd always go over there and watch him play. So when he passed away, the drumming bug just consumed me. And then summer of 8th grade, I broke my leg playing lacrosse, actually at VMI lacrosse camp. And I was in a cast from my toe to my waist for 3 months. And then after that, I just felt like music was it was a louder voice. I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to play music. I wanted to drum. So St. Christopher's, I feel like there was a moment in time when lacrosse was my thing. And in middle school, I think people would have said, oh yeah, he's the lacrosse guy. And then I think that quickly faded by freshman year, I was one of the last guys to still play JV as a 10th grader and not even really getting much playing time. And then I played, I was on varsity 11th and 12th grade, but I remember 11th grade, even though I was on the varsity team, I didn't get a varsity letter. And then 12th grade, I got a varsity letter, but I was definitely a last quarter. We're up by 5, put Morgan in. I love lacrosse until I didn't put in the time and effort like I should have. And that story actually goes into VMI too, but I won't go there yet unless you want me to.
No, I want to talk about Jamie a bit more. So you started drumming just before Jamie passed.
Yes.
And you started drumming because of your relationship with Jamie and his influence on you, it sounds like.
Yes.
And then he passes, and I mean, it's been over 3 decades, but my heart goes out to you and his family and anybody else that was close to him. What an awful story. Way too young. And John, I don't know you that well, but you strike me as a very good person, and so I imagine Jamie was a very good person. And it's just a tragedy. What happened there, but I'm guessing intentionally or subconsciously, or maybe both, you're carrying on his legacy through your drumming.
Yeah, I feel like you're so young back then. I remember we met. They kind of threw us in a room. Anyone who felt like they needed to talk to someone, and I don't think we even talked to someone. We were just all kind of there, kind of crying. And there are like 3 other guys that were really into that circle that I'm still tight with. Actually, when I texted his parents this past week, I sent a photo of the 2 boys, or my 2 friends, Andrew White, Justin Dre, Andrew White's son, who is now a classmate with my son at St. Christopher's. And I sent all that to the Van Dorstens. It was just, again, it's not to kind of go back to TV and my sister, but I felt like, back in the 80s, there was such this kind of, maybe that was the beginning of, you're looking into the television thinking like, oh, like, we could have a gang and we could do this and we could get on our bikes. And then when I met Jamie, he actually was also living 1 street over from me on West Franklin Street. His parents were renting a house before their home in Windsor Farms was done. So it was like, oh, I've got, it's a neighbor. And, he had all these BMX bikes and he gave me one. And it was like, we're thick of thieves, all of a sudden it was like this story I saw on TV. It felt like real. And this is the guy. And we're doing all these cool things. We're in Boy Scouts together. And yes, we were drumming together. And so when that kind of went away, I think maybe being young gives you thick skin to deal with it. I think we would deal with it differently now, but that story gets sadder because that summer they lost their other son.
Oh God.
To the same heart condition. They just didn't know that their other son had it. And he was working at Camp Seagull and had, I think, gone, I might have the story wrong, but what I remember is he went to like a fast food restaurant, grabbed a milkshake, and he died there. So they lost both sons in the course of 5 months. They ended up adopting a girl, and then they moved to South Carolina, and now they live in North Carolina. And I actually visited them unannounced. I guess it was 3 years ago. I was in North Carolina with 2 other brothers who I became very close with at VMI. They were both kickers on the football team, the Stutz brothers from Mooresville, North Carolina. Great guys. We went to see the Avett brothers. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to reconnect with the Van Dorsten brothers, who have passed. And so I literally drove up, rang the doorbell, and it was a pretty powerful thing, walking in, reconnecting. And their daughter had just had a son literally like 2 weeks before, and they had named him Jamie. So I got to meet Jamie. And but yeah, I feel like just in the moment, we don't realize, maybe what's being handed to us. And I feel like, if I hadn't become friends with Jamie, I certainly wouldn't have become a drummer. And I think music is one of those things for me, kind of like writing, that is just, that's my identity. I can't see a life without music. And I thank him for that.
Yeah. I ask everybody who is musically inclined and practices that craft consistently, what is it about music that draws you to it?
Well, that's a loaded question. I'm trying to let's see if I can articulate it. I would say similar to writing, or similar to working on I've got a 1969 Jeepster Commando, kind of looks like an old Scout. You open up the hood on the engine, you have the blank page, you've got the drums in front of you or a guitar, and I feel like maybe it's the ADHD brain. There's just, you can always kind of start tinkering and figure out something, and you can find success that's really tangible, whether you're hearing the success, you're seeing the success, you're reading the success, the engine works better. I've always been a sucker for close harmony. I love the Everly Brothers. I love the Beatles. I love guys who can sing in harmony. And for me, that was always my in on music. Like, I can remember listening to my mom's Buck Owen records, or my dad's probably Buck Owen records, when I was a kid. And something about that close harmony Buck Owens would sing with, I forgot the lead guitar player's name. It just did something to me. So music was in the background, the harmony, the singing. I mean, I was the choir boy who did the solo with St. Stephen's and did all that stuff. But it became more important when I was playing drums and writing songs. And I think there's such a joy in creating something. That's something I think about on a regular basis, is just, what is my legacy to this world beyond my children, beyond the kids that I've taught. I want you to be able to walk over to a bookshelf and, hold something or grab a record and say, okay, this thing was done by this guy, right? I feel like it's like that Shakespearean sonnet 18. As long as I'm going to misquote it now. As long as there are eyes to see and ears to, I'm messing it up now. This gives life to thee, right? That basically by creating something, it can be eternal. Not that I need to be eternal. That's not what I mean. But I love the idea of putting something in the world that you can point at, right? So that's also part of the music thing for me.
Yeah, it's what podcasting is for me, actually.
Yeah, exactly, right? I can't.
I think the lead singer / guitarist you were thinking of was Roy Clark, maybe.
Oh, no, it wasn't Roy Clark. Although I love Roy Clark, he's great, and he and Buck on Hee Haw.
Hee-Haw. You're talking about pre-Hee-Haw.
Yeah, but this is I mean, I could Google it right now, but he tragically died in a car wreck, and Buck never got over it. I've read Buck's memoir. It's called Buck Off. It's kind of funny.
I had to watch Hee-Haw every Saturday night because we ended up at my grandmother's, it seemed like, every Saturday night. And so I was very familiar with Buck Owens and Roy. And they were fantastic entertainers.
Yes. Yeah. My dad loved Hee-Haw, like Hee-Haw, MASH. Those are his shows. Yeah.
I do have to quickly go back, just a place where you and I also connect on this idea of all the homework we had to do in school. If my grades were good, I was allowed the end of the nightly news, and then I was allowed to watch 30 minutes of MASH, and then it was to my room to do homework for the rest of the night. And if I wasn't doing so well, MASH wasn't a thing in my life.
That is hilarious. I can relate. Yeah, my parents loved Channel 6 CBS local news, which was Lisa. I can see her. Was it Lisa? Oh shoot, I forgot her name now. And then they would go to NBC nightly news with Tom Brokaw.
Yeah.
Lisa LaFata. I think it was Lisa LaFata.
Yeah, that's right.
And Charles Fishburne. That was they loved them, and then they would switch over and we'd watch, Tom Brokaw. And I would try to squeeze a little mash in there too, as my dad munched on his vanilla wafers.
I love it, all of that. All right, so you mentioned VMI earlier. How old were you when VMI even became a consideration?
So my mom grew up in Chase City, Virginia, which is a small one-horse town. She had one stoplight. Her father was a tobacco buyer. And so when I would go visit Chase City, her dad died when she was 16, but time stood still. Everything from her childhood was, there, all the board games, all the playthings, toys, everything. But also my uncle, her brother, Uncle George Tisdale, he went to VMI class of 73. So there were pictures of him as a cadet and the bomb, the yearbook. And I saw kind of the presence of VMI. His sword was in the room. And so I knew what VMI was because of my uncle. So he got me a provisional appointment I had in my bedroom as a boy. And I remember guys would spend the night and they'd be like, what's that? What's that provisional appointment? And I don't think I even could articulate it. It's something my uncle gave me. It means, they've reserved a place for me, which is kind of a weird theory. But I knew what VMI was. And kind of like lacrosse, I definitely, when I was a young boy, had a moment when all I wanted to do was be in the military. I had Hercules posters up in my bedroom and fighter jets. And I remember I got a crew cut in 5th grade, just because I wanted to kind of more of that military thing, and was obsessed with BB guns. But then kind of like as the drumming and the music became louder and the social bug of wanting to just be around, buddies and girls, VMI was not something I was really interested in, but it was still kind of lingering in the background. So I knew about VMI from a very early age.
So how did you end up there? I mean, was it like, hey, I've rekindled my love for wearing a uniform and doing a lot of the things that you would do in the military, or is it something entirely different?
It was it was something entirely different. So my sister went to Sweetbriar. She applied to all the female schools, and I think Sweetbriar gave her the best financial aid package. So that's where she ended up going. And of course, if my parents were all about the single sex school. When St. Christopher's and St. Catherine's were in the middle of going co-ed, you probably remember the t-shirt, St. Crisis. My parents were at every meeting, actually with 9 apiece. And I had the file until recently. I ended up throwing it away, but I should have kept it. Just all the data they collected on the benefit of single sex education. And so for them, that extended into college, and they were very much adamant, listen, you should look at single sex schools. So of course that meant Hampton City and VMI. So I knew I was going to Hampton City. That's where I was going. I visited. Chris wanted to go, I think, to Chris Peace wanted to go to maybe, I can't remember if he was interested in GW or Georgetown, but it seemed like DC was in his future. And I was like, come on, let's go look at Hampton City. This is where I'm going. You're going to love it. And he's like, I don't know. I don't think so. And we showed up on a visitation weekend and were there about 3 hours, and then got the wild idea that it would be more fun to go hang out at Sweetbriar for the weekend instead of Hampton City. So we went to Sweetbriar for the weekend. But I thought that Hampton City was where I was going to go. And I was convinced of it. I told everyone. And I applied and got in. And it's probably around this time in the spring when, the kids usually decide by May 1st. And then my dad basically sat me down. I remember it was after a lacrosse game and said, we're not going to be able to afford to send you to Hampton Sydney. And you can either go to VCU and live at home. I hadn't applied to VCU, but that was kind of, I think, he was giving me that as an option. You can go to VCU and live at home, or you can go to VMI. And I think in that bubble that we live in or lived in back then with St. Christopher's, college means you pack a suitcase and you leave home. You don't stick around and live, at home and go to college. So of course I just accepted it. I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm going to VMI. All right. Like what's for dinner? So it was as easy as that. I certainly had visited VMI. I had buddies there. I had spent the night there on a weekend. And there was a piece of me that saw myself there, but it was not my first choice.
I do, as we're transitioning to the VMI part of your story, I have to ask, why the color on all the buildings there? What is that color?
I think it's like prison is the shade of it's like prison gray. I think that's what it's called. You get the swatch or the color wheel. You're like, yeah, prison gray. I'll take that.
To my eye, it has a touch of like mustard.
Yeah,
yellow.
It does.
Yeah. But prison gray's great word or great color to then transition into. What was your rat year like?
Wow. I think back then, especially, I think I think I've always been pretty easygoing, probably more stubborn, as I've gotten older, like we all maybe become. But again, I just kind of accepted it. At Sweetbriar graduation, I met a guy who I think his girlfriend was graduating. So my sister was graduating from Sweetbriar, and I met this guy up there, and he said, I'm going to be your dyke. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So when I got to VMI,
well, hey, Aldo, can we describe what a dyke is at VMI?
Yeah, sure. So your dyke is basically your big brother. He's supposed to look after you. It's named after the part of the uniform that basically crosses. Well, there are certain parts of your uniform that it's called like class dyke. It's the word is synonymous for a lot of things. It refers to your uniform. And in order to put your uniform on, you have these two kind of white straps that cross over your chest in an X with a big piece of brass in the middle. But in order to put them on correctly, you really need someone to help you dress your cartridge box in the back. So hence the term dyke. You're putting on your uniform, your dyke. And so the term is synonymous with a big brother. As a rat, you call your senior a dyke. And then the senior might call you also his dyke, but he also could call you a rat because that's what you are before you are a freshman. You're not allowed to say your class number until you break out of the rat line. So my rat year was pretty tumultuous. My dyke and I had a horrible relationship, unfortunately. We just kind of didn't see the world the same way. And I don't really know exactly what that was, but part of it was I decided they had all these walk-on tryouts for sports. And I decided, and everyone tells you if you play a sport at VMI, you're going to get out of a lot of the yelling. So it only takes, 3 weeks of yelling. You're like, okay, maybe I need to go out for a sport. So I went out for lacrosse and I told myself, I'm going to make this team. I am not a good runner. I'm slow, but I feel like I had a pretty good right hand. My left wasn't as great, but I remember about 12 of us showed up for that tryout. And I was just yelling, ball release and just trying to look like Joe Lacrosse guy. And by some miracle, I made the team. And I think they picked up 2 other guys as walk-ons as well. And I couldn't believe it. I was pulled out of formation. Joe Brockman pulled me out, St. Chris guy, who big lacrosse stud, St. Christopher's. I think he still got some records maybe, but you made the team. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, wait a second. They must have gotten something wrong. So I was on the lacrosse team, and I think that was part of the tumultuous relationship with my dike. He thought, like, if you're going to be a rat, you need to be all in, don't try to get out of things. And I was on the lacrosse team they do like a fall ball, maybe 3 months. And then I was pulled into I got a stat, at VMI, back then you didn't have phones. You get this little piece of paper, say, like, hey, Paul's called you. And it'd be like 3 hours after the phone call. So I got a stat. It said, hey, coach wants to talk to you. So, put on my uniform, went to his office, and he said, I can remember standing in front of his desk, and he said, I can teach stick skills. I can't teach speed. And he cut me, as he should have. I mean, he could tell. I mean, every practice I was just thinking about, drums. And I joined the band company at VMI, which is, it's obviously not John Bonham, type drumming, certainly not Keith Moon. And so you just make decisions. I think I made a couple poor ones. My dike wasn't a good fit. I think I should have gone out for the swim team, but it all worked out. I think that rat year was tough. Then I got really sick, actually, rat year 2, and ended up in the hospital for a month. That's a whole nother thing. But once that rat year was over, things started getting brighter.
Yeah, rat year, the standard experience is rough enough, but it sounds like yours was much rougher than the typical experience. I'll ask you what was, if you don't mind sharing, what was the hospitalization all about?
Yeah, so back then I had horrible acne. I mean, it was the worst. And I'd tried everything. And they put me on something called minocycline. And I think the way, you're probably like any drug, you're supposed to, probably eat food with it, take it at a certain time during the day. And of course, in the rat line, your sense of time is all messed up, and my skin would break out, and I would probably use the drug inappropriately, like more pimples. I think I probably doubled up and, was taking it sometimes without water, thinking that was going to somehow remedy my skin issue. And I remember one day, like, looking in the urinal, and I was like, why is my urine so brown? It's so brown. And I called and told my dad, and he's like, that's a big deal. You need to go to the post infirmary and talk to the doctor about that. So I went down there, and they said, oh, it looks like you've got hepatitis. And they thought, of course, I had like hepatitis C, the strain of hepatitis you get from, sharing needles and all this stuff. And so they quarantined me immediately. They gave me my own room and my own meals, which, let me tell you, when you're a rat at VMI, that was awesome. I felt like I had won the lottery. Like, all of a sudden, here I am, sick as a dog, and I've got my own bedroom. No one's yelling at me. And then they found out that it was medicine induced. So as soon as they took me off the minocycline, the hepatitis went away. They ended up keeping me in that hospital room. I was in there for about a month. Eventually I went back to classes, but so that was the issue.
Did you actually have hepatitis, or just symptoms that made them?
Well, it is called medicine-induced hepatitis. So basically, I guess your body can give you hepatitis if the way I understand it is, if it reacts unpleasantly to a drug, it can give you the symptoms of hepatitis. And so I don't know, like, by definition, as a doctor, I'm not, I don't know what hepatitis means in your body, but I guess essentially a drug can give you the same symptoms as the actual strand. So I was never contagious. As soon as I got off that drug, I was fine. Essentially, my liver count had to be healed because I guess it's your bilirubin, goes off the charts. But I've been fine since. Knock on wood. Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to be the 319th episode, and this is the first time I've shared this. I also had horrible acne as a teenager, so I can relate on that dimension as well. It's brutal to be a teenager and have rough acne. Like, I had so many nicknames because of the acne. None of them were polite. So yeah, I can imagine wanting to double up as well.
Yeah. Matthew McConaughey in his memoir, I forgot what it's called. It's something green is in the title, but he had a real rough go of it with acne and tells a similar story. And I think that's probably true for a lot of kids. I ended up going on Accutane, I think in my 20s, and I've never had an issue. I probably didn't even need to go on it, but I was so frustrated of dealing with it. But I feel like it was a miracle drug. And I know Dawn, my wife, she went on it. Our oldest son went on it. And I feel like when I tell people I had bad acne, they don't believe me, because I feel like that the drug Accutane is powerful. And some people would say it's not a drug you want to put your kids on. I will be the first one to say it really is a valuable resource if you feel like you're frustrated with your bad skin.
Yeah, it absolutely works. I don't know of a case where it didn't work, as long as somebody stayed on it for the 4 or 5 months, whatever that regimen called for. But it does have side effects for some folks, but we're not here to naysay or endorse Accutane. But
yeah, sure.
All right, cool. So you're past your rat year now. It sounds like you're in the top 1 or 2% for worst experiences as a rat.
I don't know. I'm sure there were other guys. I mean, I know buddies who, ended up getting kicked out or temporarily, suspended and then came back. And some guys had dikes that were way worse than mine, just physically, demanded a lot, abused them or worked them out. So I think as horrible as my rat year was, I think that there's tons of guys whose was a lot worse than mine. But it sounded like you were leading into what happened at VMI after that.
No, absolutely. Did it get? It sounds like it got better. You share that it did get better.
Yes, I the big thing with VMI for me, kind of, so I band company wasn't my people, wasn't my place. I wanted it to be because I love music, and that was the closest thing. But as soon as I got my drum set up at school, which I did, I found some like-minded guys. We formed a little band. We ended up playing, Greek Week at Hampton Sydney and Sweetbriar. And we were able to kind of have fun. It was much more of a college experience. And I roomed with the same 2 guys after rat year, because they don't let you, choose your roommates rat year. The same 2 guys, one who went to St. Chris, who is getting ready to retire from the Marine Corps. He and I lived together with another guy from Bristol, Virginia, for 3 years. One was a wrestler, one was a track guy. And for me, the English department became my place. And again, I wasn't the best student, but I had written for the Pine Needle at St. Christopher's. I started writing for the Cadet, the newspaper at VMI. And I just fell in love with writing all over again. I had some great professors. Colonel Gentry taught me British literature, which is now what I teach mostly. I felt like I was pushed and challenged. I found my voice as a writer. And, at VMI, there's not a whole lot to do. So with that prison grade paint, I was either playing music or reading literature, writing articles for the newspaper. And I found my groove, which was, music and writing. Those are my 2 things. Senior year, I was the arts and leisure editor, the news editor. Then I was the sounding brass, the literary magazine editor, which actually ended up the day before graduation. Superintendent Bunning came up to me. Actually, it was Colonel Farrell, his kind of right-hand crony, and who taught at Hampton Sydney as well. And he had the copy of the Sounding Brass, the literary magazine, and he told me, we'll let you graduate tomorrow, but you're going to have to re-edit this whole literary magazine over the summer, and we're destroying all the other copies that exist that had just come off the press, because all these football guys, they had written about their losing season, kind of like Pat Conroy, and they were just being real about it and how frustrated they were. And so they were dropping all sorts of foul language, and they weren't going to have that. So I actually have a copy of the edited version, where darns have taken the place of dams. And luckily I got my sheepskin. So that was good. I gave Bunning a hug when I got
it. Humans are funny about the whole idea of authenticity. Like I get that it was viewed as bad form to have curse words in an official publication like that for the school. But yeah, I don't know. I wrestle with that all the time.
Yeah, me too.
So I have to ask, where does one put a drum set at VMI?
I was somewhat, buddies with a guy named Colonel Brody, who was in charge of the marching band. And I think when I first showed up, I don't know if my dad made the comment like he wants to bring his drum set, and Brody's like, oh, sure, he can put it in this room. So they kind of gave me a little closet. And then after that, they created a kind of the music space. And I basically just, buttered Brody and allowed, even though I wasn't in band anymore, I had a little corner of the music room, and we had a PA system, and we had our whole little band area where we could practice and show up. And it was like, Shangri-La, the recording studio. We could go in there and just, pretend like we weren't cadets for a few minutes and, take off our hats.
So you guys were the first college band at VMI, it sounds like.
No, there were other guys before us who were doing a similar thing, but we were certainly not the first, and there were others too. There were some guys a couple years ahead of me that were doing it on a regular basis.
And they had a similar setup somewhere.
Yeah, they had a similar setup, and I think I forgot the name of theirs. It had some silly name, but you could hear them sometimes when you'd be, coming back from dinner. When I was like a rat, you could hear them in the distance. I don't know what was more painful, hearing them practice before I had a band, or hearing W&L in the distance, like on a Saturday when you're marching to class and you could hear the fraternity parties. You could basically hear the keg, like, dispensing the Miller Lite into the Solo cup as you walk to class. We had no air conditioning in those academic buildings, so the windows would be open. And I can remember distinctly like hearing Widespread Panic, playing, or Dave Matthews playing. You're like, oh my gosh, get me out of this place.
Well, I officially visited Washington and Lee when I was a senior in high school, and I unofficially kind of gave myself a tour of VMI with my parents. And I remember thinking to myself, what sadist would allow this military school to be literally border a school like Washington and Lee? And I say a school like Washington and Lee, like a non-military school. Like, who would allow that?
There's a great article that came out in the 60s. My uncle gave it to me. And I think it had to do something with, they were comparing Sparta and Rome, but essentially in this Esquire magazine article, they're making that whole argument. You've got W&L and then you've got VMI, and how peculiar it is to have these two schools, because for anyone who hasn't been to Lexington, they literally butt up against each other. So you've got, fraternity row kind of squishing against these prison cells, and it creates quite the dichotomy for the town.
My guess is a lot of the placement of things for VMI and W&L were unintentional, but part of me wishes that it was intentional. Like the W&L folks were like, yep, we're going to put fraternity row right here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, we heard those bands playing, and, you could hear guys laughing, and, that was the whole thing about VMI for me. get your work done, finish things up, so you could get out, right? Work hard, play hard. There were tons of guys at VMI who would screw around, maybe they would drink in barracks on a Friday night or something. But if you were caught doing that, you're never going to leave for like 4 months. And so for me, I always wanted to get my work done so I could leave. I wanted to have that escape. And then it becomes a much more, it's just a great balance. If you can do this thing during the week and then on the weekend you can leave. I tell people, say like, oh, I don't know how you did VMI. I'm like, anyone can do VMI. They really can. It's just a mental game that first year. And I think now it's changed a lot where they're not doing as much yelling. I've talked to some guys who've gone through it, and they're really trying to be, I think, more purposeful in teaching leadership versus teaching yelling. And I know they're some old core guys would say, well, then it's a different school, and not separate from the political nature of the turmoil at St. Christopher's, at VMI, because that is certainly there. I think that, the school has great value for young men even today.
Yeah, I'm not a yeller myself, but I can hear the argument now because I'm an Army guy. The yelling is part of making people, it's breaking them down. It's also making them more resilient to turmoil. But I think you can have those effects without the yelling.
Yeah. I as an upperclassman, that wasn't my, cup of tea. I wasn't a yeller, but it's looking back at it and thinking about those situations. I can remember the first day being there and just guys, going ballistic, the veins popping out of their forehead, yelling. And internally, inside, I couldn't stop laughing. I thought it was so funny. And I remember they sat us down and they said, if anyone, was laughing at any of this today, there's something wrong with you. And of course, like I was saying earlier, after a couple of weeks go by, you kind of stop laughing. You're like, all right, this is getting old. All right, stop yelling. Stop yelling at me. I'm ready for you to be quiet.
Were you a rat daddy?
I guess that term is, maybe loosely connected to my roommates and myself. I feel like I just was a straight shooter, like, okay, you're going to have to clean the room. And then once you do that, we're not going to bother you. Make sure you pick up our laundry, pick up our mail. I didn't go out of my way to be over the top anything. I was just I was focused on, I need to graduate on time, right? I don't have time to yell at guys or do anything like that. But all of the rats in our room went to St. Christopher's, except for one who went to Collegiate. And I think if you talk to them, I think they would say that we were all, kind and helpful and very different than my Dykes experience for sure.
Gotcha. All right. So what was the idea around graduation time? What were you going to do post-graduation?
Man, that's a good question. So
it's the worst question to ask a 22-year-old upon graduation.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so all these, these recruiters would come to VMI, they'd show up, they'd have a little chalkboard. Hey, today so-and-so showing up and you could interview. And these guys would walk away from these meetings and they'd have jobs, they'd have offers, they'd sign contracts, and they'd come back to, the corner of barracks or, in the mess hall, they'd start saying, hey, I got this job. And I remember this one guy saying, I got this job. And I said, great. What are you doing? He said, oh, I'm working for Ferguson Enterprises. And I thought, well, okay, what the heck is Ferguson Enterprises? And he's told me, plumbing parts. And I'm sure you could find a very successful career. And I'm sure Ferguson's probably a great place to work for. A lot of people know Ferguson, and I've been there, and I know that they are the area's reputed place for plumbing parts. But when that guy came back from that meeting and told me he got a job doing that, I looked at myself and thought, that is not what I want. I don't want to be selling a widget. And I was just I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I found an alum in Belize. I reached out to him. I thought maybe I could do some international business. I loved studying abroad in Spain for 6 months in Valencia. I loved getting away from what I knew. And because I'd been to Spain and loved that experience, and also had gone to like, Turkey and Greece and Africa and Portugal, and kind of had seen the world beyond Lexington and Richmond, someone mentioned that there was a VMI program where they had sent an English student to teach in Estonia, in Tallinn. And I didn't even know where Estonia was. That had never showed up in a history class for me. So Tallinn's the same latitude as Juneau, Alaska, right by Russia. And I thought, well, maybe that's something I should do. So I talked to the guy. He said, yeah, we'll send you to Tallinn. You can teach at this military college. These kids are trying to be soldiers and firefighters and border police. So those were my marching orders. After VMI, I came home to Richmond. I was a lifeguard for 3 months. And then I got on an airplane and was in Tallinn, Estonia for 6 months. And that was kind of the beginning of my teaching career, using my mom's mail to as a textbook and anything I could find, because they really didn't have anything as far as resources went, and just teaching kids conversational English. So that was my first job after school, besides being a lifeguard. My buddy went over with me. I came back early and he stayed late. I came back early because I had a serious girlfriend, and he stayed late, married an Estonian, and had his first child.
Wow. So the idea of being a teacher really didn't come into your mind until after graduation, or is it just?
Yeah, it's interesting. I listening to a snippet of your episode with Manoli Lapasi. He was talking about like kind of how he became a lawyer, and I think for a lot of us, that's our career path. I wish that I had a trajectory as a young boy. And some of these guys I went to VMI with, that you would ask them, they'd say, oh, I've wanted to be a pilot since I was 6. And they never got off that path, and they became the pilot. They knew what they wanted to do. That was never me. My mom was a teacher. As I said earlier, my grandmother was a teacher. I never thought I would be a teacher. There was never a moment when I was sitting in school at St. Christopher's thinking, I want to be a teacher. Never once. When the opportunity presented itself, it was much more, I'm going to go to Estonia, and the thing I have to do to get there is teach. And so I thought, okay, well, sure, I'll do that. I think it was a similar opportunity, like when my dad said, you're going to go to VMI. I'm like, okay. I feel like, again, that was my kind of mindset back then. Whatever, sure, I'm up for it. Let's try it. Okay, I'll try that thing. So it was never a moment of passion. My VMI college essay, I have a copy of it, believe it or not. I give it to my students without my name on it and let them just destroy it because it is so horrible. And then I tell them at the end, this was mine. They're like, oh, they feel bad that like their grade's going to somehow suffer because they told me how bad it was. But I write in that essay about how this minister in my life, my youth minister, had so much worth and influence on me. And I thought I wanted to be maybe a minister at a point in my life. But I never thought I wanted to be a teacher. So I just kind of, like a lot of people, I fell into it. And of course, now I absolutely love being a teacher.
So what happened after Estonia, where you realized that teaching was going to be your thing? Was it years later, or was it pretty shortly after?
No. So I came back from Estonia and kind of immediately was trying to figure things out. I wanted to get out of my home. I wanted to live by myself. I was just desperate to get a job. What could it be? My uncle George, who went to VMI, turned me on to, it was called Opus Event Marketing, which became Play, which is where your friend and our friend Courtney Page Farrell was working. And they kind of told me, like, we need a writer. You could potentially be a writer down the road, but right now we just need someone to answer the phones. So I'm like, great. Yeah, I'll answer phones. Sure. Similar kind of story to what I keep kind of saying. So I took it, answering phones. I remember my starting salary was $20,000 a year. That was 1998, 1999, it was not a lot of money. I remember I could pay my rent. It was like $450, I think, a month. And then my other $450 went towards like my bills. And then I had like, just a couple bucks left over to eat some beans or something. But I worked there as a copywriter. Eventually, after answering the phones for maybe 6 months, I was able to be a writer with Courtney and a guy named JB and this other guy named Jeff. And we were called the Wallpaper Team. And that really, again, sparked the fuse of writing. But the problem with being a writing, this is kind of like Mike Henry's story, another friend that you and I know. Once you're writing for hire in an ad agency, it just kind of takes out the passion, or it did for me at least. I would write this whole thing and think it was so great, and then you give it to the client, and it was like the Batmobile turned into a Matchbox car that was sitting on the ledge. It just totally turned around and was something else. So I worked there for 3 years, and I got laid off, and I was like, what the heck am I going to do now? And I ran back to St. Christopher's and talked to Casey Jones, who you probably know, who was the maintenance guy. So I had worked maintenance as a St. Chris, high school student. And I said, Casey, man, I just got laid off. I need to do something. Can you give me a job cutting grass? I'll drive the tractor. I'll pick up trash. He's like, sure. You work for us. No problem. So I started working at St. Christopher's as a maintenance guy. And I was literally pushing a lawnmower, and Janie Kingsley, who was the middle school secretary, came up to me and said, we've got this lady, she's going on maternity leave. You don't know anyone who could teach for a couple months. We need a Spanish teacher. And I said, well, I was an English and Spanish major at VMI. I've studied abroad in Spain twice. I taught in Estonia. She's like, oh, maybe you should talk to Tom Franz and Andy Smith and see. And I saw you interviewed Andy Smith. Yeah. And I remember Andy was like, we're getting ready to switch his role as middle school head. And I think he told Tom Franz, like, yeah, just take Morgan on. So I started teaching Spanish at St. Christopher's. And then that became kind of my in at St. Christopher's, and kind of relaunched my teaching.
I mean, what a maternity leave, and you taking a job, a humbling job for a college graduate, right? Wow. And look, my guess, John, is you have really enjoyed from that Spanish teaching job till now. You've enjoyed your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were still some other, kind of. Like every path, there was some movement on that path. After I was there for however long it was, Tom Franz pulled me aside and he was like, we've got a full-time Spanish positioning opening up. Would you like to do it? And I was like, no, I'm going to graduate school. I'm going to go get my MFA in creative writing. I'm out, bye. And what happened, just as the story continued, I ended up meeting my wife, my current, Dawn. We've been married now, now that I've said the number, I can't even remember, 22 years, I think, 22 years. So I met her. I was in the middle of applying to graduate school for creative writing. And I realized really quickly, I don't think I'm going to graduate school. I'm going to stick around Richmond and see where this relationship goes. And so I called up Tom and I said, hey, after I told him no, and I'm applying for graduate school. And then I met Dawn. We've been dating for, I don't know, a couple of months. I called him up and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about that Spanish position. And he's like, sorry, that thing is long gone. But then he called me back the next day and said, I've got an English position that's opened up. Are you interested? And I said, of course. So I ended up teaching at St. Christopher's middle school. But because I had picked up the trash, eaten the shrimp at the alumni party, been the son of an alum, been there 13 years, now I was teaching there with the teachers I had. Eventually I had to, my wife and I kind of looked at each other and said, we got to leave. We need to leave. So I ended up going to San Francisco after interviewing all over the country and taught at a boys' school out there, town school for boys. And I was out there for 4 years before my wife got pregnant. And then we were just trying to get back on the East Coast because her mom's from Cuba, and those Cuban Italians, they want their chicks close to the nest. So we ended up looking on the East Coast, and then St. Catharines had a position, and I really lucked out. I feel very fortunate. I got the job, and I've been there for 16 years.
Yeah. So I don't know how integrated St. Catharines and St. Christopher's are these days. But yeah, you went all the way out to a very different place, right? Richmond is, generally speaking, a fairly conservative place. And when I say Richmond, I mean Richmond Metro. I don't mean city proper by itself. Then you go out to San Francisco, and then you come back, and you're literally working 4 blocks down the road from where you went to school for 13 years and taught for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And San Francisco was, it was completely different than anything I knew. I did end up getting my MFA out there, which was great at a school called Goddard College, which had a low residency program in Port Townsend, Washington. It's actually where I think 3 of the members from the band Fish went to Goddard. But you know what? I needed that experience. I think Dawn needed it too. We needed to get out of Richmond. We needed a big city. We needed to do something together on our own to, I think, appreciate our roots. I mean, my dad loves to say, grow where you're planted. And I used to kind of not be a fan of the phrase. I think when I told him we were moving to San Francisco, he was not excited to hear that. But as much as I love that experience, I'm so, I love where I am right now. I don't know if this is I don't know if Richmond's it for us forever. My wife, again, is a North Carolina girl, and I love North Carolina, but I think that experience in San Francisco allowed me to come back to St. Catharines and essentially St. Christopher's, because I teach boys. I teach my senior elective class, which is writing short stories, is co-ed. I think it just gave me so much more perspective, kind of like Estonia and like VMI. You just kind of come out the other side recognizing, all right, other people do it differently. And then in your kind of tool chest, you have a lot more you can give back to these students.
I have to ask, because Courtney's told me this story at least a couple of times. How did you answer the phone at play?
The story, I think, has evolved, ebbed and flowed, or maybe turned into its own monster. But I think I would say, I'm trying to remember now. Hello. I don't remember what I said. Hello, this is play. I think we had to say our little catch name, which back then we were one of the first companies that would, instead of calling people like assistant VP, we had these little, cheesy tagline names. And somehow I was given R Pum or Rum Pum Pum, because I was a drummer. And man, I still think that is the cheesiest name, but that's what I got. So I think I had to answer the phone and say hey, this is play R Pum on the phone, or something like that, which just makes my toes curl now to think about it.
I'm pretty sure Courtney came up with that. And
she probably did. Yeah.
Yeah.
She did.
Oh, that's amazing. All right. You mentioned Mike Henry's name. Mike's been on the podcast.
There's certain people in my life I consider, mentors that really helped me at that time and period in my life. And Courtney is certainly a huge mentor for me at play. I really feel like she took me under her wing and helped me. And certainly Mike Henry, I would say, for a solid 2 years. And even today, I would lean on him and say he was a mentor for sure.
How did you two connect?
So my wife, Dawn, and his wife, Sarah, they knew each other, I think, through maybe Vertalina, which is a store on Broad Street owned by Deborah Boshin. She used to own Pink. And so we would go to a couple, social events, and I got to kind of meet Mike a couple of times. And I just said, hey, listen, I know you like funny stuff. I'd love to do something with you at some point if you ever want to, write or do a project. So my whole MFA was a series of essays where I was trying to be David Sedaris. I thought I could be a funny man. and I was writing, dark humor, and I'd written this essay about this time, this jam band I was in played this college party, and anyway, some shenanigans occurred, and I sent it to Mike, and he said, "You'd be perfect for this project. Let me tell you about it." So then Mike basically, in a phone call in about 10 minutes, he pitched this whole idea he had for a script, which I would say is kind of a combination of, I don't know if you've seen Kentucky Fried Movie. It was a combination of Kentucky Fried Movie, which is kind of a cult comedy classic in the 70s. It was a little bit of that. It was a little bit of European, or a little bit of just the first vacation movie. Maybe a little bit of Caddyshack, all kind of rolled into one, really about a man whose life is falling apart for a variety of reasons. And he goes on this road trip to find himself and to find his son. And it's a comedy. So Mike pitched this whole thing to me, and then we started writing it. He hooked me up with, is it Final Draft? I think that's the script software. And he taught me how to write a screenplay. And every day we would use the Voxer app, which is, a voice to voice communication. I leave him a message. He leaves one for me. And we just wrote this script, and he helped me write jokes. I outlined the whole thing using this. There's a guy named Blake Shelton who's written a book called Save the Cat, which I make all my seniors buy in my short story class. It's all about this 15-step formula on how to write a story. So every day we just chased this thing. We chased it, all our characters. And for me, it just really lit the fuse in fiction for me, because I'd always been a nonfiction guy. I always wanted to write the personal essay. I wanted the true story. If you told me the story was true, I wanted to read the book. If it was fiction, I just was like, I'm not interested, especially fantasy. I wasn't interested. But this changed something for me. A switch flipped. I felt reignited in my writing, and especially in the routine of writing. I was a real lazy writer until I started writing with Mike Henry. And then it became the routine of the alarm goes off at 4 a.m. I'm putting my butt in the chair. I'm going to write till 6:30. And then it's going to be get ready for school, go teach, and then I'll do it again the next day. So we hustled that thing. I think he pitched it to Amazon and Netflix, maybe HBO. And I think, there's some elements of that story that were maybe controversial for the time period. And I think a lot of people just didn't want to touch it.
What year was this?
So I think we started it kind of maybe midway through COVID, I think. And I think we finished it like 2023 into 2022.
Yeah, the world was quite sensitive back then.
Yeah, so that was certainly the point. And I had a great conversation with Mike about a year ago. He called me up, and he basically said this was a love letter he needed to get out of his system, or an unsent letter, like you've heard the expression before, you got to sleep on it. Right. And I think my understanding of that expression is that you would write the letter, you'd put it in an envelope, you'd put it underneath your pillow, and you would literally sleep on it. And if you felt the same way the next day, you sent the letter. So I think he really was working out some stuff about, his career, and part of that came out in the script in a real comedic flavor. And we worked on that script and finished it. And I think if he were on right now, he would say he's very proud of it. I certainly was. But then when I saw that bird wasn't going to leave the nest, and the whole time I've been thinking like, this is going to, I don't know what I thought it was going to do. It's going to change my life. I'm going to be on the red carpet. We're going to have this movie in the theaters. I remember him telling me at the first page said, story by Mike Henry, written by Mike Henry and John Morgan. And I was just like, oh my gosh, are you serious? It just blew my mind that he had put all of this investment in me and taken a risk on me. But then when it didn't go anywhere, I thought, well, that's perfect. I need to take that energy and passion and I need to turn it into my own thing. I can't wait for Mike Henry's ship to pick me up and go, to the golden area of a career. I need to do it myself. So since then, I've just been, doing that same thing, getting up every day, working on my own story, hustling, and trying to make it happen and feel like I know it will at some point if I just, stay true to the process and write a good story. If the story's good, somebody's going to want it and people are going to want to read it. If it's crap, then they won't.
Sorry for this because we're going to stay on this topic, but just a quick interjection that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. What was the name of your college band?
The one at VMI was called Maury Brook. That was named after a building we practiced in. I was in a jam band when I got back from Estonia called Beaver Traffic Jam. And we played Cary Street Cafe every Thursday night and played W&L and UVA and, kind of went on the road. And then when I was out in San Francisco, I would say the band I was in that had the most success, we were signed to a label called Rainbow Courts and did South by Southwest and CMJ and did several tours and a couple records. That band was called The Parties, Parties. And that was a lot of fun. So those are I would say those are the bands that people sometimes know me for. If they've heard that I play drums.
Yeah. So back to Mike Henry. Why don't you guys repitch? It's a new time.
Well, I've kind of said as much, when we had that conversation and, again, I don't want to speak for him, but I think the way I kind of see it is maybe there was again, he was trying to work out some stuff, did the script, and I get the feeling now he's, again, I don't want to speak for him, but he's probably kind of content with what's going on for him now with his career and with Family Guy doing the voices that he does. And I think, my observation is once you're plugged into that kind of Hollywood scene, I don't know how many feathers you want to ruffle. I could be wrong. Again, I don't want to speak for him, but I'd love to repitch it. I actually went as far a couple times in saying, like, I had a couple former students who were working with, I had one former student who was working with Cameron Crowe as his personal assistant. And I said, hey, what if, I can get the script to my former student and she can get it to Cameron Crowe. What do you think? And I think he wrote back and he said, like, absolutely not. So I get it. It's his baby. So I told him I'm here if you need me, and maybe something will happen with it down the road. I don't know, but I feel like for me, it was a stepping stone I needed to go through to find my own niche for my own writing.
So let's talk about your writing now. Are you fiction still?
Fiction, yes. Well, I mean, I write for Richmond Family Magazine. I turned in a piece this past week about kind of the love affair with a country store. We go down to Mass General Store in North Carolina when we're there because my in-laws have a place in Boone, and my grandfather's a kid had a country store. So I just love that, like, smell of, tobacco and, grit and must and dust. And there's like
salty ham.
Yeah. Salty ham. Exactly. And he like cut the ham for you, cut the cheese. And so, I still love nonfiction. I just read some big conspiracy book that I think got picked up by Netflix for a series about the CIA conspiracy, basically saying that Charles Manson was working with the CIA. It was a crazy story, but yes, for my own writing, I am all about fiction right now. I've been working on this thing for. It's painful to think about. I was looking at the dates the other day. Basically, started right at COVID. That's when I started this project, and I'm ready to be finished with it. I think John Grisham says he outlines his story in April, and then he's done with it by August. And I feel like as a writer, you can get in your own way. I think trying to be a perfectionist, and stories have to end somewhere. And I feel like this has turned into an albatross. And I just need to let it go.
Yeah, perfection's the enemy of good enough.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Your own final draft?
Yes, I would say. It's one of those things that I feel like if you feel like when you talk about it, it somehow makes the possibility of finding fruition, somehow it's going to be cursed. But last year I sent out a draft to 6 people, and I was so thankful to these a variety of people. Some are writers, some are lawyers, some are published authors. And I basically sent out this draft to 6 people. They were wonderful second readers. They gave me such valuable feedback. And now for this past year, I have been reworking it, refinessing it. And I'm actually taking a class this summer in Oxford. But before I do that, I'm going to go to this writing festival in London, meet with an agent. And that's kind of, I've got a deadline really for myself. June 1st, it's got to be buttoned up, ready to go. And I think at that point, it's going to go in the drawer if I can't, do something with it. I've just got to work on something else and let it just marinate and come back to it.
You want to publish though at some
point?
Oh
yeah, no, absolutely. Again, like you were saying with your podcast, for me, and I've shared this idea with other people. They don't necessarily agree with me, but I feel like, you want a mechanic working on your vehicle that has rebuilt an engine, that knows their way around, that doesn't just have to YouTube it or look at the computer. And I feel like because I teach English, because I teach writing, because that is my thing, I think I need to have a book. And I think that just solidifies, it's a personal goal more than anything. That's really what it is. It's what I feel like I need to do for myself. But there's also a part of me that feels like if I teach literature and I've read all these stories, the formula is right there. I should be able to create my own story that is worthy for the world. So I definitely want to be published without a doubt.
Awesome. Well, I don't know the path to publishing your final draft, but I imagine a lot of people. Well, let me ask you maybe a potentially tough question for you. What's stopping you from publishing June 2nd?
Well, you mean not like meeting with the agent, and is that what you mean?
I mean, I think you understand the path.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, what the path to publishing, you want to get an agent, right? So I've queried a number of agents. It's kind of a whole nother world for the emerging writer. But essentially, you query the agent, you come up with a pitch. Sometimes they want the synopsis of the book. In addition to that, so you might give them a very short kind of elevator pitch, what the book is about. You give them a synopsis. Sometimes that could be 1 page. And then a lot of times they'll want the first chapter, the first 3 chapters, the first 35 pages, and you send it out, right? You get the agent. They think this is a good project. I like your story. I'm willing to represent you. I think, why don't you send me the whole draft? They read it. And then they might say like, okay, I think this is a good story. We need to edit some things. Then they'll go knocking on doors for the publishers and try to sell your project. And then you work out the deal, right? They get a cut, you get a cut. And hopefully they want to build a career, right? So you're going to have a 3-book deal or something like that. So you've got to get that relationship with the agent. The agent has to be willing to put their flag in the earth and say, I'm going to bend over backwards and represent you. And this is a story I'm worth fighting for. But, publishing it's interesting. There are a lot of guys who are self-publishing, or they've, the career path can be a little tricky. The subject matter, kind of similar to the Mike Henry thing, depends on what you're writing about. People might be like, I don't know if I want to touch on that topic or that kind of a character. And so, again, I think a good story is the end all be all, right? So if the story is good, somebody is going to want it. You just have to knock on a number of doors. So I've knocked on a lot of doors already. I've had some people ask for additional chapters, but no one has said, I want the full thing. And so that's really where I am right now. I think it's 55 chapters, and I'm in the middle of rewriting like the last 14. And so you have moments where you feel like, this is great. Oh, this is the best thing ever. And then you have moments, where you're like, this is horrible. Why would anyone want to touch this? This is the worst thing. I've wasted my life. What a wretched story this thing is. But I guess that's like any creative endeavor, you just, you got to keep pushing it. And again, I'm doing it for myself. And I know it's not where it needs to be right now. I know that. So I can see why they say no.
Yeah. I mean, you and I are old enough, John. Anything that we look fondly back to, most of those were hard experiences. They were tough to get through. You probably didn't enjoy many of the moments associated with it, but you still have fond memories because you grew, you became a better person, or at least a different person from those experiences.
Yeah. And I think as a writer, especially, somebody I talked to, an author, was saying, it's like being an athlete, right? Or being a musician. You might sit down at the piano and feel like, gosh, I didn't work out that piece. I couldn't get the chord progression. I couldn't figure it out, but that's still making you a better player down the road. And I certainly think for writing, all of this, rubber meets the road, the input I've been putting in, if it's not this project that I find success with, then I think it's the next thing, right? It's just helping me become a better writer, so that when something does make it to the public domain, I feel like it'll be worthy of being read, right? It's like, what's the law of 10,000? Is that what it is? Like with the Beatles, they had to practice all that time they did in Hamburg to get the record. By the time they recorded Love Me Do, they'd been a band for years, and they put in all the time and practice. It wasn't like they just showed up and knocked it out of the park. So when America heard them, it sounded like a new band, but it's like, what do they say? Like an overnight success is 10 years in the making, or something like that.
Yeah, the law of 10,000 hours. You're going to have to put in a lot of time to get good at anything. Maybe for some it takes 7,000, others it takes 12,000. But yeah, the point is you got to really put in the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm willing to do it. I had another author say something like, "You're stubborn enough to wait it out." That's the other thing. I think that is the biggest obstacle that's up against writers. It's kind of like the VMI thing. When I was at VMI, you would turn around and you'd be like, oh my gosh, I was sitting next to that guy at breakfast this morning, and now I'm watching him like leave. He's going home. And I feel like it's just a waited out game for me. I'm stubborn enough. I'm going to wait it out. I'm willing to keep doing it. because, I'm passionate enough for it, passionate enough and wanting it. I'm willing to just go gangbusters until I get the thing that I feel like I want, because the thing I've created is good enough to be worthy of that. So, yeah, stubborn enough.
Stubborn's good, man. Perseverance is pretty important.
I think a lot of people would say I'm very stubborn. Yes. Chris Peace would certainly say that. He would say that for sure.
All right, cool. Hey, we're at an hour 45. I know you've got a hard stop here in a little bit, and I want to spend some off recording time with you as well, if you still have it.
Yeah,
sure. Let's close this episode with you telling me more about your family.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, my wife, like I was telling you, Dawn is half Cuban. And she was born in Naples, Florida, grew up in North Carolina. I know we didn't talk about it, but I can say it really quickly. Her parents are just the best in-laws I could ever imagine having. When you grew up in Cuba and Fidel Castro basically kicks you out of the country when you are 12 and you're separated from your parents for 3 years, you really appreciate the beauty of this country. And her mom, that's exactly her story. She was separated from her parents. She thought they were coming the next week, and they were not. Castro didn't let them leave. And then eventually they were able to get over here and reunite. And it's just like close to that Spanish experience I had studying abroad, just the love of family, food, all of that stuff. So, Dawn is certainly the anchor of my family. And I love those Cuban roots. Her dad, real fast, I'll just share this with you. Great coming to Jesus story. Wayne Newkirk. He was a kind of a party boy in Naples, Florida, first surfer, spearfish, ran from the cops, knew all the police by first names, flipped over a car a couple of times, went on the run a couple of times. Anyway, he built a sailboat, maiden voyage, couple 6-packs, his brother in the boat. They went into the Gulf, and a squall came up, the storm. They lost their sail, and he jumped in the water trying to get the mainsail, and he basically grabbed it and watched his sailboat that he'd made with all of his friends on it just coast away into the Gulf of Mexico. He was 6 miles away from shore, holding that sail, and they had no radio, no motor, no flares, just the skin on their back. And he swam in the Gulf of Mexico to the shore of Naples. But in the middle of that swim, he basically threw out a Hail Mary pass to Jesus and said, like, listen, if you get me out of this situation, I'm going to change my ways. I want to become a better person. And he swam and ended up on the front page of the newspaper the next day. He made it out, and he changed his ways. It took him a while, but he did. So that's my wife and her roots. My 2 boys, Atticus is 15. He's a freshman. Like I said, he's got Jay as an advisor. Jay invited me, my English teacher is a sophomore, invited Atticus and I to see Ringo Starr perform a couple of years ago. And that was surreal. Seeing Ringo, I'm a huge Beatles fan. I have his autograph right here on the wall. I wrote him when I was a kid. He wrote me back. Seeing my hero with my son, with my professor, who now I teach with, who's now the advisor of my son. And he's a big hunter, outdoorsy guy, loves to fish. He's into race cars. He told us the other day he wants to be a professional race car driver. So we'll see how that goes. And then my youngest son is a 7th grader, Levon, named after drummer Levon Helm. Also like that his name backwards is a novel. And his middle name, I think, is awesome. Olis, named after my mom's grandfather, Olis. They called him Oli. And he's playing baseball this spring, and he loves science and is got a great sense of humor. And then we've got Banjo, the sheepadoodle, the 80-pound dog. So that's my crew.
I'm still floored by your in-laws and their stories. Wow.
It is crazy. And actually that is a story I've got up on the shelf here. I tried to, that was before I worked with Mike Henry. I sat down and told alternating point of view. My mother-in-law's name is Zaida. So it's like a chapter about Zaida story being in Cuba, a chapter about Wayne being in Naples, a chapter about, so it goes Cuba, Naples, and it kind of comes together when they meet. And that's another story I need to go back to and revisit and make stronger, make better. Also, both of my sons, I'm the fourth. My name's John Luther Morgan, the fourth. And it was a little bit, if my dad were on, he would say it was a little bit of a controversy that we didn't have a fifth. And anyway, but I thought, well, Dawn and I both thought that we needed to, name them something else. We're not royalty. It's got to end somewhere.
Yeah. I have so many comments, but I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
So I really appreciate you doing this. I learned things about you that I did not anticipate. And so I enjoy 99% of these conversations. You are certainly among them. I have a guy that listens to all of these, and then he does a write-up for me just because he enjoys these stories and he enjoys doing the write-ups. He will really, really enjoy this one. So I'm happy we can give that gift to my buddy. And yeah, I want to bring your dad on with you as co-host.
Excellent. I love that idea. I'm going to work on him, and that'll be my homework assignment. Sometimes, like me, he can be stubborn. So I'm going to really sink my, teeth into him and see if we can't get him to do that. I think that would be fantastic. I gave him a book years ago. It's like, tell me about the moment you met mom for the first time. Tell me about your first car that you had. And I think I thought it was going to be so exciting to get all these, capture all these ideas. And I think he was like, nah, I don't know about this.
Oh, so you're definitely going to have to work on him.
Yeah. So I'll work on him. I think we might be able to make him say yes. But I'm thrilled that you've got a buddy who does some kind of writing with this. That sounds truly like a great partnership. So I've been so honored and humbled you inviting me on. I really appreciate it. I've never done anything like this. And hopefully those people out there listening, there's an element of all of this that makes some sense to you. And I just encourage everyone to chase their passion. And I would end with saying, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And you can be that kid with the D-. And again, I would have never thought 30 years later that I would be calling that guy, Mr. Wood, a colleague, or that I'd be the one teaching the kids. It just that you couldn't have come up with a more bizarre, science fiction storyline. That just sounds like that couldn't have been the thing I could have done back then.
Let me end with this. Go by each of your sons, and how many classes do you teach?
I currently teach 4 classes.
Right,
so four sections, 3 sophomore British literature, and then 1 senior creative writing, which is writing short stories.
So roughly 60 to 80 kids total?
Yeah, it might be like 50 kids. Yeah.
All right. So let's call it 50 plus your 2 sons. Out of the 52, how many listen to this?
You mean for me to guess, like how many are going to listen?
Yep, that's right.
Gosh, I hope at least one of them does. I hope at least one, right? I have no idea. I mean, it'd be great to I don't know, a couple hundred. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Right on. Cool. Awesome. I really appreciate and really enjoy this, John. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. I really appreciate it too. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.